Hi everyone, I am here with a story. So I'm not feeling very good. This one has a hymn before it. We're standing on holy ground. Oh, we're standing on holy ground, and I know that there are angels all around. And this story is called Wonder at the Wall. During the Depression, Robbie and Tom Douglas, the parents of two small girls, lived in a two-room house behind Robbie's father's farm. Like many others, their tiny community of Daysville, Tennessee, was going through hard times. Tom worked construction and felt fortunate to have a job, although each day he had to walk 5 miles up the side of a mountain to the road building site and then walk back at night. He managed, Robbie recalls, but the hardest part was not having water in our house. We grew up like that when we were kids. We didn't have running water, toilet or anything like that. Wash water was available in a nearby creek, but to get what they needed for drinking and cooking, one of them had to walk 300 yards up a hill and through a gate to spring in a pasture. There they would fill and carry 2.5-gallon buckets back to their little dwelling. We had to fill up like 5-gallon buckets and carry them back and forth. They're heavy. The first supply was not always enough for the day's use either, no. So usually someone would have to make the trip again. It took a lot of time and was very tiring, especially since if Tom or I was alone, we'd have to take our little girls back and forth too, Robbie explains, but she frequently thanked God for what they had. After all, He had provided them with a job and shelter, no matter how modest, when many had nothing at all. So although she didn't pray about their water woes, I knew God realized this situation was very hard for us. On Saturday, Robbie told their daughters to visit up at the farm while Tom worked in the vegetable garden. Hearing a noise, he looked up to see a tall man standing in the front yard. The stranger wore black pants and the whitest shirt Tom had ever seen. "Good morning," the man called across the plants. "I'm very thirsty. Could you give me a drink of water?" Tom stood up slowly, thinking about their precious supply. Sharing it would require another exhausting trip up the well later, but the stranger looked hot and tired. "Would you like something to eat too?" Tom asked. "Just water," the stranger answered. Tom went into the house to the container, then realized that this water would be stale by now. Good enough for washing, but not for a thirsty guest. He came back out on the porch. "Sir, please sit here and rest," he said. "I'm going to get some fresh water for you." The stranger smiled. "I'd appreciate that." Tom grabbed a bucket, climbed the hill, returned shortly with his precious cargo, and filled a tall glass. The man drank deeply. "This is wonderful water," he said, "but it's too bad you have to go so far to get it." Tom poured him another. "It's hard, but we have many other blessings." The stranger smiled and left a few minutes later. Tom watched him walk down the highway toward Daysville. He was beginning to wonder about the man. How had he appeared so noiselessly in the yard, and why? This was an isolated area. Few people ever stopped by. And what could account for this unusual feeling of peace? A feeling Tom realized that had come upon him as soon as he'd seen the stranger. Soon Robbie and the girls came home, and Tom, still intrigued, decided to go to Daysville General Store. The stranger would certainly have stopped there. Perhaps he was still talking to the men who hung about, gossiping and exchanging news about possible jobs. But then Tom reached his destination. He had a surprise in store. "What man?" His friends looked puzzled. The town was so small that a stranger couldn't escape notice, but no one had seen him. You're the only person who's come down the road in a long time, Tom, they all insisted. Tom felt certain they were right. About 2 weeks later, Daysville experienced a heavy rain, and water began seeping out of the ground about 30 feet from Tom's house. After the ground had dried, however, the little trickle remained. Mystified, Tom went back and forth for the next several days, looking at the wet spot. Finally, he got his shovel. "I'm going to find out what's going on out there," he told Robbie. He had barely broken the surface when water flowed, bubbling from an unseen source. "Robbie, come quick," Tom called. He had found a new spring, one that was right where the stranger had stood. It was the end of our long trips up to the pasture, because the spring was one of the best ones around, Robbie says. It never went dry, and it remained during the entire time we lived in that house. A short time after the Douglases moved, however, another heavy rain came, and the spring disappeared as spontaneously as it had arrived. Robbie and Tom never doubted the source of that spring. They had given a cup of water in his name, and had been blessed abundantly in return. Isn't that nice? Be nice to strangers, because you never know when you're helping an angel. You think that was an angel? You think it's Jesus? What did Jesus say? When you help one of the least of these, you are helping me. He could have been serving an angel. He could have served Jesus himself. And I think he done it well. And they think Jesus thought so too. And gave him a spring. Good night, guys.